Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 9 of season 4 of Babylon 5, Atonement. Circa fabric is a part of Zack's new uniform, grown on very few plantations on Minbar, but it itches. Zack's complaints about Minbari having no fashion sense earn him a sharp jab from a needle, and instead of reprimanding the stabber, Lanier congratulates them, but suggests they use a bigger needle next time. It's apparent to Lanier that the uniform is not the issue, it's what it represents. Zack agrees. He feels he's stealing Garibaldi's position when he expects him to be back. It's a change Zack isn't comfortable with in that sense. The passenger on the Minbari shuttle that came in off a war cruiser as this episode opened has arrived. Apparently they are here to collect Delenn for something called the Dreaming, and if it does not go well, she will not be able to return to Sheridan. Say what now? Ivanova is apparently on the way to a Drazi party, wearing a green sash. Interesting. Jakar is getting his new prosthetic eye fitted. He hopes it isn't in backwards because he says he's looked into his soul enough in the recent past. It's in the right way round, although it causes him pain as it makes its last connections, but it isn't the right colour for him. Franklin says he can adjust that. It works, although the image quality isn't as good as normal, and Franklin tells him he'll need to recharge it as it uses a lot of energy. He's fascinated by the fact that it can be removed, but it will still send signals back to the neural net in his eye socket if not turned off, and starts giggling as he uses it to look back at the place it should normally be placed. Ivanova has apparently had a very successful Drazi party as she hobbles past Sheridan on a crutch, reminiscent of the last time she got involved in Drazi politics. He's on his way to Delenn's quarters, where she is dressed in a black dress and is in full-on come-hither mode. She says that John still owes her a third night together to formalise their relationship, and he knows there's something else going on. She finally says that she is going back to Minbar the next day for what could be an extended stay, but doesn't offer specifics. John is clearly worried, but doesn't press. Amongst the meetings Sheridan mentioned to her is one with Marcus and Franklin. He's sending them to Mars, which is no simple thing as the station is quarantined with no direct traffic to Sol. He says Clark is kicking them with his propaganda, and if they don't start pushing back, they may lose all credibility. Marcus reckons the round trip could take as much as 5 weeks, owing to the need to keep changing ships and generally travel a little quietly, but both understand the need to open up new lines of communication to the resistance on Mars. Sheridan warns them not to say where they're going, and Franklin asks him alone if he wants him to check on his father. But as we thought last time, if they had him, Sheridan believes they'd have used him on broadcast, so better not to send their resources into what is almost certainly a trap environment full of night watch. Delenn silently bids farewell to a sleeping Sheridan and pauses before leaving her quarters for what might, by her body language, be the last time. On her way to the departure area, she is quietly and firmly ambushed by Lanier, who clearly knows what's going on. He affirms that his place is by her side come what may, and she warns him that if he goes with her now, he may learn things about her that would cause him to question his dedication to her. This does not sway him, of course. The fact that he holds out his hand to her and she takes it shows how far he has come over the years. Lovely establishing shot of Minbar with a war cruiser in the foreground. So it transpires that it is Delenn's clan who have called her back, because the Minbari have rules forbidding them from being romantically involved with or taking as a mate a non-Minbari. Delenn is obviously running counter to that, which they feel could have a grave impact not just on their clan, but Minbari society as a whole. So they are seeking to establish exactly what her motivations are, and to do this, they will use a ceremony known as the Dreaming. Lanier will be her guide, but as he acknowledges as they enter the chamber, having taken what is probably some form of drug, he has never been in the Dreaming before. Delenn, however, has as a guide for another, Dukat, their greatest leader, when she was just an acolyte before joining the Grey Council, both inexperienced and terrified, and we drift back. Delenn of the family of Mir, Dukat reassures her that he is in fact still breathing, and this is full Minbari Delenn, who we've not seen for a very long time now. In fact, we've never seen her this young. She's reminiscent of Lanier first arriving on the station being in awe of her, and now here she is in awe of Dukat. He invites her to join him in the Dreaming, but suddenly she is thrown, terrified, into the midst of the disastrous first encounter with the human fleet in which Dukat was killed, and she was there with him. Lanier tries to reassure her, but fear is etched across her face. Before the battle, Dukat plucks her from a corridor and brings her before the Grey Council, putting her on the spot to try and break a deadlock. this is actually much earlier in time. He has heard of a primitive race known as human, and every caste on the Grey Council has come up with a reason not to make contact with them from their own point of view. So Dukat wants a different perspective, but Delenn is like a deer in headlights, never having been before the council before and acutely aware of her own inexperience. Yet as Dukat notes, she is 10 years out of temple and well trained, so he presses her for her views as she has been trained to think. Delenn steps into the circle and quotes Vaylin, that the unknown enemy can hurt you in ways you do not know. Dukat presses her for her own view. She thinks that if the universe puts a mystery in front of you, it would be polite to investigate it. Curiosity, the child and the closed box. Dukat says the council have forgotten this simple pleasure where an acolyte has not. He dismisses them for further thought and asks Delenn to walk with him. Delenn asks him whether he will make contact, but he says he will not go against their wishes, which will remain the same. To do so would be to use his power as a club, which he rejects as a notion. What he has done, though, through her, is called out how foolish they are being, and he apologises because that will blow back onto her to an extent, but it means the truth is where it needs to be, even if they continue to act foolishly. He asks her to look at him as she protests, saying, "I cannot have an aide who does not look up. You will be forever walking into things." A line Delenn had to give to Lanier when they first met, as he too would not look her in the eyes in the beginning. And so she becomes his aide, he her mentor, perhaps because no one else would have her at that point. Then we flash forward to her acceptance onto the Grey Council, and the Trilunary reacting to her strongly, judging by the expressions on the faces of the other council members. Dukat pauses by Delenn's quarters to congratulate her again, and she says he looks troubled. She asks why the Trilunary glowed when it was near her. Dukat says that while the Trilunaries came from Vaylin 1,000 years ago, there is also a belief that they came from the future. He says that now she is on the Grey Council, he can tell her more about why he chose her and her heritage. Then an alert sounds out, and we see the disastrous first contact with the humans has begun. Delenn recognises them as she researched them herself since that early debate. Delenn spots soul hunter ships approaching, and Dukat quickly realises what the traditional stance of approaching with gunports open is going to provoke, ordering them shut. Too late. The Prometheus opens fire, and the Minbari ships are hit, and the human fleet then jumps out. Dukat dies in Delenn's arms, and when she is told that the Grey Council are in deadlock about whether to try and find out why they attacked or to take revenge, in her grief she calls them brutal animals and orders the retaliatory strike, effectively beginning the Earth-Minbari war through grief at the loss of the best of them. Lanier tries to comfort her, suggesting it was the humans who were at fault for misinterpreting what was supposed to be a sign of respect. Yet ironically, this is why she then tried to stop a war that had taken on a life of its own. Had she not been so full of rage and grief at that moment, she might have reasoned out what had happened rather than resorting to revenge. She's been trying to atone for that decision for the last decade, and as Lanier points out, that is what her clan will fix on. That bonding with Sheridan is just a part of her trying to atone for starting the Earth-Minbari war. And with that, the doors open as the dreaming is deemed over, and they cannot lie about what they have seen. Yet Delenn is not convinced that was why she was being shown that event. As they wait for morning, Delenn replays what she experienced and comes to realise that there was a detail she missed while she was in the dreaming, something Dukat was saying to her just before he died in her arms that she missed even back then. So controversially, she heads back into the dreaming, even taking the clan leader who has raised the issue in with her, so he can see firsthand the reality and share the experience. Lanier is also with them. And Delenn goes back to the moment of Dukat's death, encouraging them all to listen as he explains that part of why he chose her was that she is a child of Vaylin. And with that revelation, things drop into place as Lanier persuades guards at the Grey Council's archive to give him records that prove Delenn's heritage. Dukat had access to those records as well. The clan leader acknowledges that he already knew, because although not much is known of what happened to Vaylin, a Minbari not born of Minbari as we know now, of course, after the war, the reality is that he married and had children off Minbar for fear of persecution, but they returned. And those children had children, just like Delenn, who carried a degree of human DNA with them, and so caused the Trilunaries to react. Consequently, Delenn being with Sheridan will not pollute Minbari DNA because it is already polluted anyway, and of course her DNA is not pure in and of itself after her chrysalis phase. Delenn is firm with him. He asks her for a reason that would allow her to marry Sheridan, and she's given him one. Yet he is terrified that if it became common knowledge that human DNA had mixed with Minbari to such an extent, it would cause social upheaval. He comes up with a counter-proposal, that in the past, when Minbari still warred with each other, the winning clan would give a female to the losing clan as a symbol of life. As the humans suffered the most deaths in the war, Delenn could give herself to Sheridan in the same way, and so honour will be served, after a fashion at least. Sheridan meets Delenn's returning shuttle. She still isn't telling him about what happened, of course. She asks him what's been happening on the station, and he says not much. Marcus and Franklin are now outbound to Mars and out of touch as expected. We join them on a less than luxury liner as Marcus opens and shuts his Minbari fighting pack to Franklin's annoyance, the conversation around which can only end, as Franklin points out, with a gunshot. And then Marcus goes into singing mode with a modern Major General, and for the first time ever, the closing credits soundtrack is replaced by Marcus continuing his rendition about the square of the hypotenuse, and a Franklin scream towards the end. Appropriate that Medusa Cascade just revisited War Without End, because of course this dovetails with it rather nicely in the sense that we now discover that 1-1 is actually a descendant of another 1. So something of a great-great-great-grandfather paradox, or something. What this fundamentally means, of course, is that the reason for stopping the Earth-Minbari war was even more justified than perhaps they knew. If they had started using the Triluminary on Minbari in general, presumably quite large numbers of them would cause it to activate in response to fragments of Sinclair's DNA being a part of their genetic makeup. Actually quite interesting when I think about it, because if the Triluminaries were programmed to respond to his DNA, did they have to reprogram one to react to Delenn's DNA for Chrysalis, or should it always have reacted in her presence anyway, and the rest of the machine then jump-started it? Would that transformation only have worked for a child of Valen? It's hard to know just how much Dukat knew of what was coming, but the Vorlons probably couldn't have told him that much for fear of distorting events that had already happened. My guess is that Sinclair went back with clear instructions from himself about what could and couldn't be done with a view to preserving the winning timeline. Interestingly, Delenn notes that Valen's body was never found. We've had a few glimpses into the clan structure of Minbari culture before now, with Lanier protecting one of his own. But the idea here of Delenn effectively being subservient to the wishes of her clan, even after her change, is quite interesting, and her hesitation is of course a reflection not just of her own personal desires, but also of just how much she's been influenced by her own experiences since leaving Minbar. As she once noticed to Jakar about his growth, she's no longer quite the same Delenn that first came aboard the station all that time ago. The slightly annoying thing in a sense is that the clan leader clearly had an alternative path in his back pocket all along, so you wonder if he really had to put her through the ringer like this just for his own status. I did enjoy seeing her as a younger, dehumanised version of herself. I smiled at how long it's been since we've seen her, as she was pre-transformation, and you can tell the makeup is that much more refined now too. Also lovely to see her relationship with Dukat in more detail, and the callback to the Soul Hunters who said they tried to get his soul but failed. Surprising how often that season 1 episode gets called back to when you think about it, but that's planning for you. Nice to see Delenn all in white for the dreaming as well. Sounds almost aboriginal. In fact, we saw her in black and white in the episode. That's probably the most costume changes we've ever seen her go through in a single episode. All in all, I really liked this episode, and seeing more of Minbari culture directly on Minbar itself, which isn't something we saw that much of, up to this point, in any event. Nice moment with Lanier suggesting he beat up some guards as well. Killing other Minbari not allowed, but clearly a touch of combat is not an issue. And we also return to the familiar B and even C plot here. No idea why Ivanova partying with Drazi was randomly a thing, but Marcus and Franklin going off on a Martian side mission is a real departure, literally and metaphorically, for them, as part of the Earth conflict storyline. We've seen them being used as comic relief together before now, so per the final scene, I think we can assume that shenanigans are going to ensue. Life has somewhat got in the way when trying to get this one ready, but I think the storyline really speaks for itself, as it was so character driven this time round, so I'd better get this recorded and up, and hopefully the next one won't be done in quite so much haste. But I've not been late yet, plus you've had a bonus third space video. In fact, I mentioned in my third space introduction that this was about the right time to be reviewing it, and actually I hadn't realised Zach hadn't got his new uniform until this episode, so if you haven't watched the third space video yet, this is actually the logical time to do it, because he's now head of security with his new uniform. So, as I say, I better get this one up sharpish, and I'll see you for the next one. Cheers for now.